and hit record. And Hannah's got the attendance in the chat. I will say before, so at least it's on the recording as well. I did not finish getting all the attendance stuff done. I know I said I would, but again, I had a doctor's appointment today and there's a ringing in my ear, but attendance didn't get done. So, things will balance themselves out. Just make sure that A, you put in your attendance, and then B, when you do a makeup class, make sure you're putting in your attendance. And it's on the home page of the Canvas page. It should say attendance link on there next to the Zoom link. If you feel like anything is messed up for any reason, that's fine. Just shoot us an email and we will straighten it out some way, shape, or form. So I'm going to start us with the presentation. It's called Beyond Backpacks and Binders. I actually started this one about a year ago. NAGC had me present on some practical discussions around executive functioning. So this is actually the version that I did for the William and Mary presentation. And then my ELC friends who've already been through this, the original was a 60 or 75-minute presentation. I gave you guys the 30-minute version. This is going to be somewhere in between. The QR code on here actually does work, and it takes you to not only the links, but it also would take you to, I'm going to get there. Hold on. Oh, some of the strategies that I talk about that I didn't want to go into super detail on. However, on one of these slides somewhere is a bit.ly, and the bit.ly will also take you there. So don't stress out that you need to grab that QR code. And there we go. Oh, see, this is why you know it's a presentation, because I have to introduce myself. I'm not introducing myself. Also, of all of my presentation, this one has the best quotes. So I just feel like you should know that going into this. So yeah, so the first part we talk about who are our 2E students. Obviously, that is the theme of the class. So I'm not really going to dive super deeply into this. The one thing I kind of talked about here, because again, this really was meant to be presented to general education teachers, but also nationally, where they don't do a huge job of actually identifying their twice exceptional students in other districts. And so what I wanted to do was to kind of talk about, when we're talking about twice exceptional students in a broader sense, we know we're going to have identified students. We're going to have kids who are sort of identified. They've either been identified as gifted or been identified with an IEP, but they might not be clearly defined as twice exceptional. And then we have our kids who we just assume they need more, but we really don't know. So those groups are important to kind of think about when we think about what it is that we're doing. Because in terms of this executive functioning presentation, because a lot of what I talk about when we talk about executive functioning is going to be, you meet the needs of the kids you know about to support the kids you don't know about. And there's a lot of expectations, and really, I would say secondary folks, sometimes I'm talking to you guys more at this point. There's a lot of things we expect our kids to know, especially coming into 6th grade, coming into 9th grade, even the ones who are about to graduate. We expect them to know a lot of things that nobody ever taught them to do. And so if we can approach our classroom and some of our other instructional pieces, knowing that we have kids who, for whatever reason, haven't been taught clearly enough, or it's part of their disability, even if it's a masked disability, they need to be taught how to do these things. And so that's kind of the lens that I like to look at. That's the lens I like to use to look at our students when we're talking about executive functioning. So I just talked through all that. So the bulk of this conversation really is called the hidden curriculum. And we are going to define the hidden curriculum as the values, expectations, and norms that are expressed by a teacher, a school, and a system. So what does that mean? That means if you're the teacher who always has your objective and homework written on the board, and you expect that your kids know to look at the board, thank you, Bella. You expect that your kids know to look at the board and that's see where the homework is. You have a system set up in your classroom where you come in and you unpack and you put your homework away and you have your hole punch in the back of the room and you've got all these other things. That's your system. What this means for twice exceptional students specifically is there's all these expectations that we have in the classroom that are never explicitly taught. They're never really told. You might show everybody where the homework goes, but you don't necessarily do a lesson, so to speak, on how we take out our stuff and put our homework away. That's just a single kind of isolated example, but it's really just all the things that we expect to happen in a classroom that are never truly, they're always a part of the baseline of the classroom and they're part of the expectation, but we don't go through a huge rigmarole of teaching them. And so we're going to talk through that for the first part of today. So the first thing I'm going to do, I need to pull my chat back up because what I want to shoot out to you guys is a question. How many steps do you think it takes to put one piece of paper in the correct section of your binder? And I'm going to change that. I don't care what section of the binder it goes in. It needs to go in your binder. How many steps does it take? So we have, the one step, just put it away. 2 steps, got to open your binder, put it away, close your binder. 4 steps, open, find our section, put it away, close the binder. And then my last choice is 9 steps or more because opening your binder is just the beginning. Let's see, I've got a 4, a 9, 8 to 12, 2 to 3, 4 plus. My favorite answer was the person who told me once 0 because I've never owned a binder. I'm like, perfect, you are my people. All right, 7, 9, I like. All right, so you guys can go ahead and keep answering and I'm going to go through my process. So the first thing you need to do is remember where you put your binder. Then you have to take out your binder. Then you have to open your binder. So I'm already at 3 steps with my brain is. Flip to the correct section, open the rings, put the holes in, hoping it's hole punched because otherwise, then we got to close the rings, flip the sections closed, close the binder, and put your binder away. But if you were like me, did I remember my binder? It's fine. I'll do it later. That's the biggest one, right? I can get it down to 2 steps because if I remembered my binder, I'm not going to put it away anyway. I'll just do it later. I don't even make it to shove it in my binder. Nope, we didn't get that thing hole punched. So, maybe we did get through. I remembered my binder. I opened my binder. I got it to the right section. I went to put it away. It wasn't hole punched. I could add 14 steps alone just trying to get something hole punched. Or I can just do the other thing where, there was no time for holes, so I'm either going to try and shove it onto the rings and then it tears, or I'm going to just shove it somewhere in my binder and I will, famous last words, take care of it later. I opened the rings, but the rings weren't the way they were supposed to be, so now I've had a binder explosion and everything is everywhere. I slammed my binder shut. I didn't actually go nicely close the rings. And so now I have, instead of a binder explosion when it all came out, now I have the binder avalanche where everything on the one side just kind of went flying onto the floor. And what if, by some grace and miracle, I actually made it to the end? I closed the rings mostly properly. I folded my sections. I put my binder away. And now I look up and I'm ready to go. And the teacher's 10 steps ahead because she's already told me, put away my binder or put away my paper in my binder and expected it to be done. And now she's given 16 directions since then. And I just finished putting stuff away in my binder. And so now I am lost, confused, frustrated, and have it again reinforced. This is why I don't put things in my binder because I have no idea what's going on now. And the worst part of that is if you're the kid who goes, wait, what are we doing? And so frequently, and I've been this teacher, so it's not that I'm throwing shade, but like, you're like, seriously, like I told you, put it away in your binder, take this out, and let's get ready to take quiz. Let's get ready to have our pencils out. And even having this issue myself, I forget sometimes that the kids do too. And so then there's a frustration from all of us because I feel like you're not listening to me. You feel like I'm not listening to you. We're not listening to each other. And it's just going to go from there. So, I read the story the other day about the support that my mom gave me. And when I was writing this presentation, because shocker, I rewrote the presentation the day before it was due, sitting at my mother's dining room table, which is usually where I'm sitting to get my work done when I haven't done it and it's the last minute. And I was trying to talk her through what it was I wanted to say. And she said, but it's as much about being ready to learn as it is about actually learning, because if you get yourself in gear, then the instructions you're getting are totally useless. And that's brilliant because I can listen to directions, but if I'm not ready to go, the directions don't mean anything. Or I can be totally ready to try and go because I want to learn. But if I'm not ready to hear those directions, then it's just not going to get done. So, classroom teacher, what can we do? Absolutely, it's the whole thing about being available to learn, right? Because if I'm not available to learn, I'm not going to learn at all. So we're going to talk about a bunch of different things. We're going to talk about establishing routines, providing support and tools around routines, self-monitoring, trial and errors, and then support in establishing personal routines. So the first thing about establishing routines, especially when we're talking about people with executive functioning disorders, but also just kids with ADHD, anybody who has to learn a routine and isn't going to be good about learning that routine for whatever that reason is, you have to tell the why. One of the great examples I often have about this is if you think about, I'm just going to use my husband for an example. I label everything in our kitchen. You should know where to put the spoons. Does he know where to put the spoons? He has no clue where to put the spoons. Can he quote to me the entire 400-page codex of Warhammer rules around demon bloodletter, army of whatever? Of course he can. Is he an amazing dungeon master? Can he run multiple worlds at the same time and be in 6 different games a week and have all sorts of idea about whatever? Of course he can. But he can't put the spoons away because my routine for putting away spoons has no meaning for him. I wish it did. When we talk about people with executive functioning disorders, they are going to put meaning, or they're going to remember things that have meaning for them. And if you don't make something meaningful for them, it's just going to go out the window. One of the apps that I actually had a student recommend last summer, it's called, shocking, I have it on my phone, right? Oh, I lost it again. It's on there somewhere. It's actually on the Canvas page. It's called, I think, Griffin Tools. It basically gamifies routines, and the idea of like doing your work and following chores throughout the day. And the reason that my students have said that it works is because the reason they've said it works is because it puts fun to getting things done that you're supposed to be getting done. I started using it. It wasn't working for me, but that for me, it was a lot like I didn't care if my little character died, so it didn't help. There was also a calming app or a self-care app called Finch, which I downloaded because that's my main name. And I thought it was great. And he had a little bird you have to keep alive. Yeah, no. And I didn't keep Tamagotchis alive either, just for the record. So for me, keeping something alive is really not the best way to go about. But for other people, doing those kind of gamified routines really work for them because it gives them a reason. They don't care about whether or not they get their routine done, but they care about whether or not their little character stays alive. When you're in your classroom, if you care about a routine, you've got to tell the kids why. If one thing I found was the kids never cared about what their grades were, but they cared that I graded things. And I would point out to them, well, if you don't put it where I'm going to find it, it's not going to get graded. Just so you know, that's just one of those things about how they work. So for them, following the routine was important because they wanted my feedback on things. Whether or not the feedback was useful, that was a whole other story. Constant communication and at multiple ways. This is something I think that I think elementary teachers do particularly well because, and I think it's because of the population. You guys know when you're getting first and second graders, they haven't been in school before for very long. They need more of that instruction. By the time we get to secondary, we expect that they know. And we forget, like somebody said in the chat, we've got 7 or 8 teachers a day with expectations for us. They all have different expectations. So if we're not getting that constant communication and feedback, we're not remembering what it is that we're supposed to be doing. And you'll hear me talk about Think-A-Louds. I talked about Think-A-Louds the other day in terms of managing perfectionism and executive function, or managing perfectionism and feelings around making mistakes. kind of the same thing with establishing routines. Using think alouds to talk about how I'm establishing routine and then the why I'm establishing a routine is a really important thing to do because it helps the kids, again, find the why and find the buy-in around what it is we're talking about. Providing tools. So tools are going to be one of these things where some kids require it and most people benefit from it. And some will get really annoyed, and that's okay too. Things like checklists, and this is where your special educators are going to be so important to you in your classroom because even if they don't know what it is that you're doing, they know how to make a checklist for it. They know how to break down tasks and make things more simplified and easier for the kids to understand. Um, Teaching kids how to use the tools and teaching them to the whole group will go a long way because if a child needs a tool because they need a checklist for packing up at the end of the day, let's say, and this is true for kids in high school as well as elementary, although elementary tend to use it more. If you go over a checklist with your whole class, you know, these are the things that we need to check at the end of the day. These are the things we want to make sure are in our binder. We want to make sure in our backpack. We want to, you know, make sure that we get to this point. You're going to teach it to the class once, maybe twice. You're going to end up pulling a small group of kids to help remind, and then you're going to have a couple kids who need a lot more reminders than that. But by teaching it to the whole class first, by the time the kid gets the individualized instruction around it, they're hearing it for the third or fourth time. So it's not the first time they hear it, and then they need 5 or 6 repetitions from you, and you feel like you're saying the same thing over and over and over again to a single person. If you establish that as part of your teaching practice, when they get that individual instruction, they've already heard it multiple times. And so it has a better shot of being internalized, but it also doesn't feel to you like you're repeating yourself constantly, even though you're still doing the same number of repetitions. And then the label everything. Like I said, my entire kitchen is labeled. It doesn't do the best job. It doesn't do the worst job. Um, I will say that where I keep my tea was where I used to keep the baby bottles, and it's still labeled wine glasses. And for some reason, that is the one thing my husband knows how to put away. He always knows that the tea boxes go where the wine glasses are supposed to be. I don't know why that works. We have a very different household. But literally, I've got kitchen stuff labeled. I've got in the closet, towels are labeled, socks are labeled, everything is labeled. So there is some sort of chance that we can keep things in a somewhat normalized sense. And in your classroom, the same kind of things. You know, if you have a place for homework, go put the homework there. When I taught I was teaching grade 6, 7, 8 in the same classroom. Everyone had a color. You know, 6th grade was blue, 7th grade was green, 8th grade was yellow. And I tried to print my papers on the same colors so that even if things went cockamamie in the classroom, the kids always knew, like, this is my grade, this is my color, and they knew what it was that they were supposed to be looking for. Color coding is another great way to kind of help with the meaning piece, just because it's a way to do a quick visual reminder for the kids without making them put too much thought or effort into what it is that they're going for or looking for. Yeah, like kind of said, she's got paper pickup and supplies. The student centers I've seen with some of the other groups, I think those are all awesome tools to use. And then while we're there, labeling digital documents is a huge thing. I will bet most of you, if not, we pull up mine. If you go into your My Drive on Google, what are you going to see? Untitled document, untitled document, untitled document. The kids are the same. But again, we're talking multiple classes and multiple things. So give explicit instructions for how to label things. I also know, just like staring at a blank piece of paper sometimes is overwhelming, trying to figure out what I'm supposed to title my stupid document can be overwhelming to me. And if you have the kids doing something like MLA format and they're putting their name and teacher and blah, 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 the first thing on the page is their name. So if they click on the title at the top, it's going to auto-populate the first thing that's written at the top of the page, which in that case is their name. So maybe they don't have new document, new document, new document. They have Sarah Jackson, Sarah Jackson, Sarah Jackson. Equally as useless as everything being labeled as untitled. So take a few minutes in the beginning of any time you have them opening a document and give them the name and teach them how to label things. So instead of just calling it science, biology semester A, there's a biology A semester 1, 2023. Label it. DNA project, reptile project, cell structures. having them label things out will give them a better chance of finding things later. Even if you only get as far as labeling your classroom, it's a lot easier for me to search for all of my untitled documents in my biology folder. At least there's a good shot they're all biology, and I don't have to go through 18,000 different documents trying to find something for biology if it's out in the main folder. So just taking that little bit of extra time um, to help the kids figure out how to organize themselves at the beginning of any marking period or semester. And even in elementary school, this is a habit you can start. It's not going to be necessarily as critical. You might not be doing as much typing, but you're helping them develop that habit. And then the other, these are my untitled documents, right? So one thing you can do also is, besides giving them titles to type up there, one thing you can also do is do a forced copy. And you guys see this sometimes in my Canvas classroom where I ask you to make a copy of something. I used to have one called MLA template, and it was a make a copy, and the kids, anytime they started a paper, could do a make a copy. And I eventually would have it as the template, and I would have the name of the assignment at the top. So even if every single kid was copy of animal cell essay, at least in your folder, copy of animal essay is yours. Now for me, then I get 15 copies of copy of animal essay, but then, it was up to me to sort it as the adult. By at least having them be able to make those copies, it was a lot easier for them to keep themselves organized. And then the other piece of it is, it gives you the opportunity to add rubrics and checklists. So if you're forcing them to make a copy of the template, you also can automatically attach your rubric or your checklist on there, and then everybody's getting a copy of it regardless of whether or not it's required. And then the kids who require it have it, you have a chance to go over it, and it travels with the document so that it's not another piece of paper that the kids are losing every which way. Hannah's making a really good point. The Canvas integrations, if you're using Canvas, they do automatically label the documents. It's not quite as smooth as it was in Google Classroom. For me, that was one of the things I really did miss when we switched from Google Classroom to Canvas. But it is doing a better job than it was. Elementary folks, I know you guys very rarely use Canvas for the kids, and so it might not be as easy, but that's why teaching them to label things in elementary school, I think, is important, because then when they get to secondary, if their teachers are using Canvas and some of those auto-populate features, they've at least learned a little bit of it so that they can know to look for things that are properly named within their folders. And then this is my last piece on digital for a hot minute, the submit button. And there is something about turning things in. We talked about this with the perfectionism. It is sometimes really hard for the kids to hit submit. It's the same as the kids who do all their work. And if you dump out their binder, you will find every single complete assignment in their binder. They have never turned any of them in. You will often find the same thing with the submit button. The kids will finish the essay and they won't turn it in. I don't know why. I can't explain it. But one thing that I really strongly feel about is, one, for as teachers, even if we have to hover over them, and this is one of those times you might have to hover over them and say, press the submit button now. You might need to click the submit button for them. I had kids who just couldn't do it, and they just, well, let me check one more time. Or, well, I don't know if I'm really finished with that. And that is some of that perfectionism rearing its head. I am this person. I get so panicked about the idea of finishing something, I struggle to do it. I can do 99% of a project and can't do that last 1%. I need the help to do it. I need the reassurance. And sometimes I need my friend to come over and actually hit the submit button for me, because it's just so overwhelming to do it. I'm not saying everybody's like that, but it is a true phenomenon. So when we're thinking about kids who are struggling to turn things in, especially when they're doing it regularly and you know the work is being done, just that little bit of follow-up can really help with our kids in this case. The other piece is, and I feel really, really strongly about this, and I know county has policy, but turning something in is a behavior. Assignments are about content. If you mark kids down because they turned something in late, you're grading them on their ability to turn something in. You're not grading them on their ability or what they know about the content. So I know it can be a fine line. You guys see how I run my class. Everything's turned in by a certain date. I have people who want incremental deadlines, and I'll work with them as best I can. When I was in the classroom, I worked a lot closer because, IEPs, but We want to make sure that we're grading the correct things. If we want to correct behavior or adjust behavior, let's not use our grades to do that. Let's find other avenues to help build those skills with our students. But there's nothing to me more frustrating than a kid who says, I tried my hardest, I did my best, I know I turned it in late, and I only got 50% because I turned it in late, and the teachers never looked at the work that they did. I know that's the policy, but for kids with this profile, that is just demeaning's not the right word. It's demoralizing. Because then at that point, they're like, I could have written 2 stupid sentences on this and turned it in and gotten a 50% and not spent so much time and done my best and still get a 50%. So what's the point? And that's what the kids will internalize. So it's not true for all students, I understand, but for kids with these profiles, we really want to be careful about what message we're sending when we're doing our grading and when we're accepting their assignments late or considering their late assignments. So talking about instruction and self-monitoring. Self-monitoring is literally that, your ability to manage yourself. Um, Teaching time management strategies in the classroom, one of the things I found to be super effective, and when I found this to be effective, what I mean is my co-teacher figured it out and it was brilliant. She and I would sit there and we would back map on the class and we'd talk at the end of the day, this is how far they got, this is where we wanted them, blah, blah, blah. And at one point we were like, it would be a lot more meaningful if the kids could sit here and watch us do this to know how much effort we put into it. And then the light bulb comes on and we're like, oh, well, what if we did this with the kids so they could see how much effort we're putting into this and what we're thinking about when we do this? Again, it's a think aloud strategy. So what we started doing was when we started a project, we would give the kids a blank calendar that was however much time we expected to spend on the project. We would put the end date in when we wanted it due. And then as a class, we would talk about what it is that we wanted them to do. And I will go over this strategy a little more later. But we would teach them how we went through the process of breaking things down. Within the classroom, even not for a long-term project, but when we're talking about, hey guys, we've got 25 minutes to work independently today. Some of the kids, that's too much time. They need to know what they're doing in the first 2 minutes. They need to know what they're doing after those 2 minutes are up. Helping them break that down and see, whether it's visual timers, in secondary, this is a great time to teach the kids how to use their phones or their watches for good and not whatever else it is they're using them for. There's so many visual timer settings out there where you can give them that opportunity. Let's work on this for 5 minutes and then touch base and see where we're at. Because what will often happen if we give 25 minutes, even though it says that's so much time you should have gotten your work done, well, I'm going to spend the first 20 minutes of that staring at the clock or staring at my paper or staring at the ceiling. And by the time I get to, okay, now I'm ready to go, there's only, 5 minutes left and I didn't get anything accomplished. And now I'm frustrated, you're frustrated, we're all frustrated, and I don't know where the time went. Um, with ADHD, the phenomenon is called time blindness. Um, I'm sure other we see it as well. I just know that that's what we often will deal with. And that's when the kids are saying, they're like, well, I don't know where the time went. I felt like I worked the whole time, and we saw them staring off into space. It's because they're kind of getting caught on a loop in their head. The other thing that's important with this is using conferencing to talk not just about content, but about the progress that you're seeing with the kids. If we try one strategy and it's not working, let's have a conference and talk about what's not working and why it's not working. The same as we would with an assignment, we want to talk to them about their strategies. We also want to teach them how to give themselves both positive and critical feedback. And we talked about this a little bit with the perfectionism piece, where we talked about being specific with our feedback and making sure that we were giving them specific praise and specific criticism. We also want to teach them how to do that. I did a really great job managing this set of time. I'm really struggling with understanding what to do just to get started. Having them take ownership of what it is that they're doing is a really important piece. So, checking for understanding. We know in general, checking for understanding is making sure they are understanding what we're teaching them. But with our twice exceptional students, checking for understanding is about checking about all the other pieces of the puzzle as well. What are we teaching them directly? Where are we not teaching them directly? So check for understanding can look like a whole lot of different things. And this is where you can see I have my bit.ly on the corner there because in there I should have strategies specific to all of these different areas. So like how do we do check for understanding on tasks and assignments? How do we do metacognitive support? If you want more details on that, I'd absolutely go there. So this is one of those big areas where we're going to talk about planning for success and accepting failure, especially when it's um, especially when we're trying to teach them strategies. Not all systems are going to work. And if you're using a more traditional system like a binder, like writing things on the board, a lot of kids already feel like failures going into that. A lot of kids with this profile will feel like failures going into that because they already have 6 other teachers doing it and it's not working there either. And so part of figuring out what works for our kids is helping them believe that they're going to be successful, but also have strategies for when they aren't successful. Part of that being not successful is being honest, both with you and with themselves. One of the hardest things to combat with our kids is when they're like, I'm going to use, homework examples are great because homework is never really good for our twice exceptional kiddos. But I don't need to write that down. I'm going to remember it. No, you're not. You need to be honest with yourself. You're not going to remember it. And honestly, still do this. You know, adults do this all the time. You guys probably all do this where in the moment it is so clear and blatant. There is no way you're going to forget it until you do. So having the kids have those conversations, you told me that yesterday and you didn't remember what it was, and that's okay. But we need to come up with a new strategy. What is the strategy that's going to work? We need to own the choices that we're making and that they're not having the outcomes that we want. Differentiating routines. If you have a routine, and one of the easy ones for me is, Hannah said she had the routine of like, this is where you go to pick up supplies. I have had kids who will get lost every single time from their desk to picking up the supplies. It is just outside of their wheelhouse to remember why they stood up from their desk, get to the place, get whatever it is they're getting, and get back to their place. Honestly, those are the kids I bring it to their desk because I can't lose the time and they can't lose the time of getting halfway across the room and either getting distracted by a peer or forgetting why they got up in the first place. There are times that the routine is just easier for me to say, here's the thing you need. That doesn't mean that I'm doing things for them because it's part of that explicit process of like, this routine's not working. Let's do a routine that is. And if me handing you a paper means that you stay focused longer on the assignment that you're doing, I'm going to call that a win. I'm also going to make sure I'm clear. Like, you're going to get lost if you go get this. So I'm going to take care of that part for you. This is what you're going to do while I'm getting whatever materials it is. So making sure they understand the type of partnership that we have and it's not just me doing for them. And this is where that support for establishing personal routines comes in as well. They need to know what works. So when we talk about, successes and failures are really easy to find, right? Because it didn't work. And now I don't know what to do next. But when we find a routine that works for a student, so I have one student, love him to death. He was the one who could not turn in a paper to save his life. And I mean it almost literally. He was also captain of the wrestling team. He did amazing things. He could tell you all the kids' stats. He could manage the team itself. He was fantastic. He could not turn in a paper to save his life. And so what our routine became was really once a week for math and resource, he would come in, he would dump his binder and his backpack on the table in the front of the room. He had to sort everything out into piles by subject. And then we would go to the math pile and we would sort out graded, not graded. And anything that was not graded, I would then immediately hand him a pass and he would walk down the hall to his calculus teacher, because this was calculus, and he would hand her the calculus work and she would say thank you because she is amazing. We didn't worry about due dates and deadlines because we were doing it once we figured out where the problem was. We did it weekly. So she knew by the end of the week she was going to get all the work that was missing. We tried to do a thing about him, the papers were crumpled and they looked terrible. And we had some teachers who were really, really particular about not getting crushed papers because they felt like it was disrespectful to them. And I can understand that, but I also can understand having a student who I need to be concerned about whether or not he knows the content and whether or not he gave you evidence that he knows the content. I can't be worried about what that evidence looks like. So sometimes it's coaching the adults in the situation as well. But yeah, so then every week he would walk down the hall to the teacher and give it to her because we tried, end of the class, we tried, hey, here's your packet. Can you go take it to her at lunch? You're going to see her sixth period. Can you? No, it wouldn't make it that far. So every day in race or every once a week in resource, we did other classes other days, but math specifically was the one that was such a struggle. And he would hand a stack of paper to her and she would just go through what she needed. Um, and we would make it work. And then in the meantime, I would take all those piles he had already sorted and I would nicely stick them in a stack and I'd stick them in a paper clip. And when he got back, he put them into whatever folders or sections it was that he was using. There is a difference, you're right. If you're a general education teacher, talking to other teachers versus special educators, this is part of the coaching that we do. This is part of what we do when we're talking about supporting kids with routines, going to those other teachers, adult to adult, and having these conversations and not leaving it to our students. Because often what our students are going to do is they're going to go back to what we talked about before, and they are going to hide their failures or lie to themselves about what they're able to do because they don't want to feel that failure. So that's where we step up as the adults and provide some of that support to helping the kids find a system that works. The other thing is, and I think I've taken this out of this presentation, but it's in the bit.ly link that I had, was on alternatives to binders. I don't like binders. I see their use. I understand why people use them. Um, I have lots of binders from when I have like due process hearings. They're okay for that. I did not discover my Pensia for organization until my junior year of high school. And that's when I discovered the 5-subject spiral ring notebook, where every single subject had 2 pockets and it had a section for notes. And so things I was going to need to take out again went in the front, and things that were for just general edification went in the back, and my notes were in there. And that was about what I could handle. At some point, I may have done one binder for before lunch and one notebook for before lunch, one notebook for after lunch. I could not make it to the end of the year with a binder, but I still have some of my high school notebooks. And at this point, I have them just to say I have them. They're not actually useful to my life anymore. But that got me through junior year, senior year, and all of college. I stopped losing things. There was something about that binder that was just, it was too many things in too many places, and I opened it too many times a day. I wasn't gentle enough with it. Papers would rip, my rings would break. I would get frustrated, and then I'd just start shoving things in. With my 5-subject notebook, I could shove things in because the weight of it kept it all kind of neat, nice and neat, but I didn't have the same type of avalanche issues. I have some kids it doesn't work for them. I saw, I think it was Hannah who said the accordion folders. Accordion folders are beautiful for some kids. I would knock them off the desk and all my papers would go flying. I don't do accordion folders, but I have a high number of students who would do accordion folders and it worked really well for them. I had students who you would do the alphabetized ones and they wanted to alphabetize or whatever, just whatever system worked for them as long as they could find their things. I was okay with it. And that's really where we have to learn to be more flexible with our students. I think we're doing a better job as more and more cool office supplies come out. You will also find often people with executive functioning difficulties or disabilities seem to have a real obsession with office supplies. And there's so much of it. For me personally, I would say it's the hope of what an office supply can do for you. It is the hope that they will be the thing that solves it. Oh, Hannah's showing us her amazing marker collection. I can't lie. I have the same thing right here, and they're all actually in a layout in my drawer, so I can't pick it up because it's not on a spinny thing, because otherwise I will sit here and spin my spinny thing all the time, and I can't do that at work. But sometimes what happens is you get so involved in finding the system, you never actually use the system. And so that's really where we want to talk about support for our kids, and finding systems that work for them. Emily, I feel you. Like, this is the first Prime Day where I didn't buy office supplies or new markers or anything, and I am so proud of myself. Like, I made my mom give me kudos this morning because I didn't buy any office supplies this year. Very proud. All right, so speaking of hyperfixations and things that people with ADHD do when they have other things to do, this is one of my favorite slides because it spins backwards, literally. So I started to talk about try again. Started to talk about mapping a little bit ago. And there's two different strategies that I think we can use for back mapping. Oh, before we get there, I want to pull some stuff from the chat. So for folks who only see students once a week, that's really where you have to kind of take on the piece of coaching and coaching with other teachers. So, you're doing your thing in your classroom, but really where the support comes in is the buy-in from the other adults in the building. And I know that can be really difficult, but if you're going to them and saying like, this is the folder system we're using, or this is the whatever we're using, or here's a laminated checklist that I made, and we've been practicing with our student checking it off. I need you to make sure they're checking it off. They're responsible then for helping them check it off as opposed to helping them create the checklist to begin with. We do have to rely on other adults to support with this because very frequently we can come up with solutions, but if everybody's not on board, they're not happening. And it is harder when you only see them once a week. And so that really comes in. And in this case, I'm assuming you're talking about having other students, kids who have IEPs. It's part of the IEP. If we said, adult support for organization on the IEP, or time during the day to organize materials, whatever that is on sup aids, we have to do it. And so you're handing them a system and you need them to support you in handing them that system. I do. Monica mentioned she's working students on modifying daily school routines. Yeah, so that is a big piece. And specifically, I know that the kids that Monica's working with, she's working with them because often there's a lot of anxiety paired with that. Are students who really struggle with a disruption to their routine, even if it's a positive disruption like a field trip or music day or whatever else is going on, if they're used to a very solid routine and suddenly things change, what it takes to not only get through that day, but then get them back on routine can take a lot of effort and a lot of energy. Preparation is a huge part of that. This is coming, this is coming, this is going to be different, this is coming, and getting them ready for that change. And then also kind of always having a sort of backup plan B. For my kids, frequently it was, I got sick in the morning, we have a sub. I tried to always get the same subs if I could, because at least even if they didn't love the sub, at least they knew what was coming when they had that person. Um, and going over with the kids, this is what our subroutine looks like. These are the things that could happen. If you ask the sub for something and they tell you no, that's not me telling you no, that's them getting through their day. So we'll fix it when we get back. And that was a big thing I tried to teach them is, try and be as copacetic with your subs as you can. Whatever you feel like goes wrong, we will fix it when I come back. And that went a long way to, yes, I expected them to have good behavior, but I also frequently, especially if I got back and nobody turned work in or something was missing or something went missing when we had a sub, I was very particular about never penalizing my students for that because things can go missing. I was a sub for 10 years before I became a full-time teacher. Things go missing, whether or not you intend them to, especially when the sub doesn't know the routine. But getting the kids to understand that and prep that was the work I was doing. Not so much what do we do when we have a sub, but knowing that our routine will resume when I come back. Um, I do love the pocket folders. I like that they get to choose. Math is always red because I don't like math. That's how that works, right? Now every day, anything that's in red is important folder. So there you go. Hannah said math is blue for her. I can't math. Blue is my favorite color. The only caution I ever have about pocket folders, and it's gotten better, it's about really knowing the kids, because for some kids, the paper folders rip really easily if they're really rough on them. If it's a class that has a ton of paper, you want to make sure you're helping them monitor that or reinforcing with tape. It seems like a minor thing, but I did find that, once that folder ripped, there could be a lot of emotionality attached to the ripping folder. So having an eye on that. And then the plastic folders are really slippery. And so sometimes everything would just slide out. I wish there was a better solution, but monitoring is the top solution I have if they're doing paper, um, if they're doing paper folders or plastic folders. But that is a great way, and that especially for middle school. I found it a lot more effective in middle school than high school. But some of that also is just I don't know. My high school kids were too cool for folders. I can't explain it. I also did at some point get a lot of folders that had like a lot of sarcasm on the front of it, and they were really into attributing sarcastic comments to their classes, and that actually was a really good way for me to help them organize. Exact same comment, but instead of colors, it was like sass. I absolutely love that. A journal once where the kids were, what subject was what color and why. Yeah, that can be like an amazing, that could be an amazing debate topic too, getting the kids to socialize and talk to each other. So I'm going to go back over here to back mapping. And I have two different pieces that we talk about with our back mapping on here. So the first one is using these incremental due dates. So incremental due dates are really exactly what they kind of look like on the screen. It's where I say, I want to get something done in, let's say, 10 days. And so I break things into steps, and exactly, it's chunking. Step one is going to be 3 days. Step two is going to be 4 days. Step three is going to be 3 days, and we're going to roll with it. What I really liked about using something like incremental due dates was one, and this is what I would do with my co-teacher, is that when we decided we wanted to get something done with, say, 10 days, we would talk the kids through it. But then every day or so, we would stop and talk about where we were, and we would adjust. And what that did was, one, it taught them how we as teachers back mapped what it was we were doing to try and get to our outcome. It also allowed us to really hear where the kids were. And so it stopped being as driven of, I need to get this done in 10 days, so we're getting it done regardless of how you're feeling. It was more of a, where are you guys at? And as somebody who I only co-taught with her 2 periods a day, she had 5 classes. So there were times where all 5 of her classes were in slightly different places. But what we found over time was that even if they were in different places in those 10 days, they were still much closer to all finishing on day 10 than they were if we just kind of said, okay, we're going to stick to this, and we're going to try and okay, class one is moving ahead. You know, we finished class, this one class finished in 8 days, this other class needed 15 days. By stopping and having those conversations with the kids and then working together to figure out how to manage the time, we found it to be a lot stronger of an approach. And then there also was a lot more ownership with the students. Because what you ended up doing, what we found ended up looking like, was that, say, for example, step one only actually took 2 days. We saved ourselves a day there. Step two was so complicated that we actually had to break it into in half. And then we needed 3 days for each of those instead of the original 4 days for the single step that we planned. We still needed 3 days for our last step. So the final project ended up taking 11 days. But that's a lot better than losing control and ending up at 15 days and we're still not quite done and half the kids haven't finished whatever because we're marching along at this whatever pace. The other nice thing about the incremental was the ability to build in the extended time. And that's really what this other one is about, is the idea of a flexible due date versus extended time. If a student has extended time, they require their extended time. I can't get around that. But what I can do is say, if an assignment is 10 days and the kid has 50% extended time, they have 15 days. And if I tell you, you have 15 days to start this project instead of 10, so you have extra time, ask me what day they're going to start their project on. And if you answer anything other than day 9 or later, you're wrong. All extra, or day 16, perfect. All extended time does in this sense is it procrastinates them when they're starting the project. If we use those incremental due dates as a class, then we start to use flexible due dates for our students. So we build that extended time into each step. So for example, if I, find that I planned 3 days for step one, obviously for a kid with extended time, I'm thinking they're going to take 5 days. My whole group took 2. So maybe 3 days would work, which is what my original plan was. Or maybe I find out with my kid, they're a kid who doesn't need a lot of help with the brainstorming. They're going to need a lot more help later when we get to steps 2, 3, 4, to the organizing piece of things. And so maybe because we're chunking this down as a class, I can see where they don't need the extended time. And then when we get into that, which for me was usually going to be um, research or um, research, editing, structuring, any of those pieces, that's usually where my students need the bulk of the extended time. But this way I can add extended time here onto the first set of day 3, and we can extend that piece of it. knowing that the rest of the class is not too far behind. And I can help them manage and monitor that time. I understand it's harder to do if you don't have a co-teacher, but this is where teaching the kids to manage their own calendars, even if we're doing it as a class, because what you can do with your extended time students is if you have the calendar on the page, and as much as I love digital, sometimes paper is nice. If we plan out our 10 days as a class, and then you give them a different color and say, and this is where we're going to plan the extended time, and you show them how you're planning their extended time, it helps them keep up. It also helps with their case managers. If they do have a resource class, it can help with the parents. And it could be something that they're going to lose that paper. So you're going to mark your extended time, lay it out how you want it, and then they're going to leave it with you in the classroom. Because planning out the extended time is important. Having a piece of paper in front of them to help them see that isn't always important. Have them take a picture if they want their own copy, but you manage it so you know when that extended time is built in. And that way, if you have multiple kids with extended time in your classroom, and one kid really needs help on the front end because they brainstorm like crazy and they can't solidify down to one idea, they need help on the front end, but your kid who refuses to edit because I already did it, so why would I bother? They're going to need help on the back end. But by managing those on paper and managing the class as a whole, you're able to keep track of their extended time better. So they still get their extended time, but they get it when they need it. And you have a lot less likely chance of them starting their work on day 16. Um, I will say the other thing with the flexible due dates, one of the things that we found really challenging with this, with Canvas, is I understand sometimes when you put due dates onto things, it locks them in Canvas. Make sure you learn either how to unlock that feature or stop that feature of locking things down. Or the other thing is there is a feature in Canvas that lets you put kids into groups. And you can have a group called Extended Time, and any of the kids in that group would get a different due date than the whole class. So any kid who potentially has extended time, you could give them an extra week. It doesn't even have to be at 50%. It could just be open a little bit longer so that they can manage things with their case managers. Um, but it's a way, again, for you to set that up and kind of drive your own bus, but it gives them the flexibility to do the work they need. Because I know another thing kids would find very frustrating, especially with Canvas, is if you've put an assignment with a due date or a deadline and it locks, and they need that in order to move forward, but they're already a little bit behind because of extended time, because of whatever, they can't get back into it. And that struggle of why should I bother becomes really relevant at that point. And that is the thing I run into the most when I'm coaching in high schools, especially, is managing, using those digital tools that things like Canvas allow us to have at the same time that we're trying to manage all of our kids and all of our classes. So if we're going to use those tools, make sure we understand all of the tools and make sure we understand some of the more nuanced pieces of them. And those are all things, honestly, as I learned about them, I learned most of that by Googling it on Canvas or Googling it, because I would say, like, if this exists, there's got to be a way to either work around it or use it differently. And that's where Google can become your friend. I'm going to go through this last section pretty quickly because I know we're right up at 8 o'clock. Um, and this is really on being proactive. If you have a kid who you know is twice exceptional, do not let more than 2 weeks go by without having a personal check-in with them. It is really easy for them to get lost. And if they're not behavior problems, it's really easy for them to get lost. So check in personally, what are you up to? How are things going? These guys, especially when they're not behavior problems, are going to be really good at masking that there is a problem overall. So building that relationship, asking them what they're proud of, asking them what they've been doing that they're really excited about will really help with that. So that when there is a problem, they're more willing to open up to you. And then when you do your check-ins with them, go over your current assignments, clear up confusion about past assignments. If they're missing stuff, half the time they have no idea they're missing it, and the other half of the time they're probably hiding that they're missing it, or in their head they think they still have plenty of time even though it's 3 weeks overdue. So make sure you're really clear about what your expectations are. And then at that moment, plan when the next time you're going to check in is. One, that sets a good example for them. And two, it gets it on the calendar. And three, you don't forget, because we all know in a 9-week semester, 9-week marking period, it's really easy to let 2 weeks go by and not realize they've gone by. So it keeps both of you on track for what check-ins they need. And if you're in a class where you have multiple twice exceptional students, You could do group check-ins, you can do individual check-ins, but the one-on-one check-ins with them I think are really important. If you have a co-teacher or a para in your class supporting you, that's awesome. You can balance the check-ins, but don't leave all of it to your co-teacher or your para. Make sure that you're establishing and maintaining that relationship with the students. Being proactive with parents. Twice exceptional children do not fall far from twice exceptional trees. Sometimes the parents are just as disorganized as the kids, and sometimes the parents are so hyper organized because they have to be that they get really anxious about when they don't know things. If you can post stuff or send things home, make sure you are. Um, Elementary teachers are really great with this. They usually send home those weekly newsletters with bullets. High school, secondary, I know it's a lot harder, but anything that you can have that is like, the most important information. And I know some teachers who just have a running Google Doc that they share out with parents, and it's like 3 things we did this week. Hey, we're reading this novel. You might want to ask your kid about it. These are the formula. This is a formula sheet that we've been working from. Make sure your kid has reviewed it, has a copy of it. The other thing is anytime you can link calendar homework into a document that parents can access is very important. And make sure parents know your best contact and your best office hours. I don't expect that you guys are calling home at night because you shouldn't have to, but parents should know, and parents should know that you're more likely to call during third period because that's when you're off. And so if parents have that heads up that my off period every day is at 10:30 a.m., that's probably when I'm going to be making phone calls, then they'll be more prepared. And if you say, I would like to talk to you, this is when I'm free, they know that ahead of time and can be prepared. One thing that you guys know I do, and I know Hannah does as well, is using that booking link in Outlook on your email. Um, I have it set up. If you click on mine, one will say parent, one will say teacher. Those are my public links so that anybody can make an appointment with me. And I've actually taken to when people email me, I will just respond back and say, hey, look at the link in my chat and find a time for us to talk. It has changed my relationship with the world because I don't forget to call people back because they make appointments with me and it's on my calendar and I know that they're coming. My parent links have different time hours than my school links do. So like high school teachers, you're up at 7:30 in the morning. I'm not happily up at 7:30 in the morning, but I will be to talk to you. I don't talk to parents at 7:30 in the morning. So having those different links on there. And like I said, I know Hannah's, it blocks the time. So the only time she's available for those meetings is during one or both of her planning blocks. So own your time, take control of your time. And if you have one day after school that you will meet with parents, make sure they know that because when you're working, it is hard sometimes to take time during the day. And that's where it's unfortunate that teacher hours don't line up with the rest of the working world. Um, but making sure parents know when you're available because your high anxiety parents will do better if they know up front when they can expect that communication from you. Being proactive with your special education team. One of the best ways that one of the easiest ways it was for me to support teachers was that I didn't have to hunt them down and figure out what was going on. Some teachers were great and they would just sort of send me, even if it had no explanation or organization, they'd send me something in the beginning of the week so I would know what was going on with my kids. Or they would just shoot me random links and I would know, okay, I can look up Hannah's name and all the things that she needs. Um, all the things I need for her class are going to be somewhere in the emails from her. Making sure that you've read your students' IEPs and 504s. And even though I've heard this, people say this is entirely untrue. 504s are legal documents. They are legally required. I've heard people say that, oh, the difference between an IEP and a 504 is that you don't have to do an IEP or you don't have to do a 504. The kids have to ask for it. Entirely untrue. You have to do 504s. They are legal documents. They're not the same kind of legal. They're under a different federal code than an IEP, but they're still legal documents and you are responsible for implementing them. And you can end up in due process hearings if you don't. They're not fun. I don't recommend them. So knowing what's in them and asking questions when you have questions. There's a lot of heavy language in these, and sometimes there's things that sound entirely clear to us at the table, and then you guys get them in the classroom and you're like, what is this? That's a fair question. Ask, because we meant something by it when we started it. So make sure that you're, understanding it. And if you're not, let us know. And then being proactive with your English language development team as well. Same kind of deal. they often have really great strategies that we can use for multiple kids. You know, again, same idea of kids with 504s, IEPs. What's required for some are good for many and should be available to all. So hearing what type of strategies they have. Checking in with your paras is really important. You know, making sure that paras are really used to a certain type of student for support. When you have twice exceptional students, your 2E kids need the executive functioning support. They need the, you know, not do you know what to do content wise, but like, do you know you're supposed to be working right now? Do you know where your book is? Have you put this away? Did you remember to turn this in? It's a very different type of support that they need. And so making sure you're checking in to say, hey, the kids are starting a new assignment today, so don't forget that so and so and so and so need to talk out their ideas before we have a chance, before they start writing. So maybe plan a conversation with them. Giving them some direction is going to go a long way to helping the parents maintain a good relationship with the twice exceptional kids, especially if they're not used to working with our twice exceptional kids. Hannah's got some great stuff in the chat about reaching out to parents during pre-service week or secondary high school in between semesters, because I know we do change teachers. You know, just saying like, hey, this is who I am. This is my role. Yes, I know your child has an IEP. You know, let me know more about them, and here are all the ways that I communicate. And I'm sure she'll send that out or post it as an announcement in the classroom if you guys want that language. Sidebar note, never, ever, ever tell a parent that you didn't know their kid had an IEP or a 504. It is so much better to say, that's a really good point. I forgot about that. I probably should go back and reread to make sure I didn't forget other things, instead of going, oh, I had no idea your child had a 504. That's a legal problem. That sets us up. That makes the instructional specialists and supervisors very sad. Saying, you know what, I completely forgot. I really need to go revisit that document. Even if revisiting is you're revisiting the classroom because it's the first time you've seen it. Don't tell the parents that, please. And that's why I end also kind of with this quote, because a sonnet actually reminds me of an IEP. It's very, very structured framework, and you have complete freedom within it. And that really is what executive functioning is in the classroom. It has to happen. There has to be some type of structure. Everybody's structure is going to be different, but within that structure is the freedom to do what it is that we need to do to make sure that our kids are ready to go. The problem is most of our kids, especially kids with executive functioning disabilities, live in a free verse world, and you're trying to make them learn a sonnet. They need you to really teach that structure, to hold them to that structure, and to guide them through the structure, because it is something that is entirely alien to them. And they need that constant reinforcement and reassurance to know that they're heading in the right direction. And at the end of the day, we're all going to be able to share something that is meaningful to everybody. And there's my bit.ly again. I'm going to go ahead and say stop sharing. And I'm going to go ahead and have us do a break. I know I went a little longer than I typically do. Let's plan to come back at 8:20, and we'll go from there.
If you have gone through the equity information on your own, and we have half an hour left, so I think that should be just enough time to go through all of it in a way that is additive and not repetitive. Let me get this part out of the way. So we are going to discuss, definitions from the system failure report, triple identity theory, EML and giftedness, LGBTQ+ students and gender considerations, and then poverty. So skip that. The first thing that we have is the system failure report. That is a report from Purdue University, and the data in it comes from 2015 to 2016, which, saying aloud, is almost 10 years ago, is a little crazy, but it is still relevant.
Your screen is currently blank for us.
It's blank. Okay, hold on. Screen sharing is paused. What about now?
Nope.
Nope, cool. All right, stand by.
This is only sharing maybe
Well,
side of the screen.
Do you have the slides, Sarah? Could you put them up? Because I don't know why.
in about 2 seconds.
Thank you.
I see your face.
Lucky you.
No, it's weird. It's like sharing your face and your screen.
You see my screen now?
Mm-mm.
Or no,
It
you
says
just
your
see the
screen
black.
sharing, but it doesn't show your screen. Oh, I that was my fault. Automatically clicked on session 3 because it used to be session 3.
Here, I'll drop the slides in the chat. Sorry, guys.
I got it.
Oh, you beat me to it.
I did. How's that?
So we are awesome. Can you head to slide 5? And then one more. All right. So the system failure report was an investigation, a study of gifted education in the United States. And the primary finding was that there is not access to gifted education, especially for children from minoritized groups. They found that there was a decrease in students identified for gifted programs from 2000 to 2015, 2016 school year. There are a few reasons for this happening, but a big one is that gifted education is not always considered an equitable practice. Tracking historically and today typically results in white and Asian children being in higher tracked advanced classes and Black and Latino children ending up in lower tracked classes. And typically, upward mobility in tracking is very rare. Kids who start out in 6th grade in the lower track classes tend to be in those lower track classes in high school. There's not a lot of shifting and not a lot of upward movement. That has been something we have been more aware of with time, especially when people are explicitly made aware of it and when we are looking at the racial composition of our classes, but it's not something that has been remedied. It is still a problem nationally. It is still a problem in MCPS. That said, I don't think Sarah would feel either, that eliminating gifted programs altogether is the solution. We need to instead make sure that all kids get access to them. And giftedness might look different in different populations based on the opportunities that the kids have. Sarah, could you go to the next slide?
Yeah, and actually what I will add is that what research shows is that when you eliminate gifted programs, access to enrichment significantly decreases for those same minoritized groups that access ends up going away because it's the schools that really are the leveling the playing field. And so it needs to be about opening access at the public school as opposed to eliminating the program itself. There was a report done in 2015 in MCPS called the METIS report, and we can talk about it later, but basically it showed the exact same thing that this is talking about on a national level in MCPS. I can talk about the whole ELC thing as much as I know about it, but we are definitely moving back towards as the curriculum office has said, one curriculum for all, one curriculum should meet everybody's needs, and that is their plan moving forward at this point. What that exactly looks like, I don't know, but the reason that ELC exists and the reason that the AIM and the humanities courses at the middle school level exist was as a result of the meta study that came out at the same time as this system failure report came out.
Thank you, Sarah. So this definition of equity focuses on representation. So representation ideally should be proportionate. So if 50% of students in a school are Black, then 50% of students in that school's gifted program should be Black. What we tend to see, though, is that maybe 10 or 15% of students in that program will be Black. We have far fewer represented or underrepresented than we should have. Sarah, can you go to the next slide? I wish it was working. I don't know why. Missingness means the students who could have been identified, but who weren't. There are some steps in place to try and remedy this. For example, in MCPS and our GT identification process, we have different benchmarks for some special populations, which, Sarah, those are EML students, students in schools that are over 70% farms, and some students with IEPs, MSNA groups?
So when we're talking about identification for GT identification, it's, yeah, students who are receiving farm services, students who are receiving EML services, students who are receiving IEP services. Um, And then because of kind of how things happened this year, students who are in the community schools, there was something different with them, and I can't quote chapter and verse what we did with that. It's a little bit different when it comes to the criteria for going into either CES or some of those other programs, but there is also a different threshold for um, those students as well. It's just a little bit different when it comes to the criteria for the programs versus gifted identification.
Mhm. So for the gifted identification for most children, those thresholds are at 80% on those tests of achievement, but for those kids in the special populations, it's at 70%. That doesn't completely remedy the situation, but it is a step in the right direction. Sarah, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. All right. Norming means that you are comparing a child against their peers. Often when we norm, it's compared to all children nationally. When we do local norming, we are considering the relative circumstances of that child. So if a child is in a Title I school, the odds are that the scores in that school are going to be lower than at a neighboring school where families have more money, because the children in the Title I school have not had as many opportunities. It's not because they have any less ability, but because they haven't received the same opportunities as kids in other schools. So when you are considering whether a child might be identified as gifted, if you use local norming and consider the child in comparison to others in their same situation, you are going to receive a more accurate representation of what that child's abilities actually are. So while a child in that school might appear in the 60th or 70th percentile on a national norm, they might appear in the 85th or 90th percentile in their school in that context. Questions about that? Or confusions or comments?
Locally norming is one of those things. It's a really important thing. It's one of the most important things that we talk about in terms of gifted and program identification right now. Um, Local norming can mean a lot of different things. Some places will locally norm to the district. We locally norm into quintiles. So
Okay.
there's, yeah, so it's high farm schools, medium high farms, medium farms, medium low farms, and low farms. That comes out to 5, right?
Yeah.
What that exactly means, don't ask, because I sit in the meetings, I still can't answer the question. But basically what we're saying is we're not looking at just single school populations, but we would look at, say, like she said before, like, if we're looking at for individuals, it might be anybody who's receiving farm services. But when we're looking at a norming for a school, we might say any school where 75% or more of the students are receiving farm services, that would be a high school. I don't know if that's the actual number, I'm just making that up. So if we have a school where fewer than 5% of the students in the school are receiving farm services, that could be considered a low farm school. So that way it's more than just the population of, like, we don't want to end up in a situation because of differences. So like Ashburton has almost 1,000 students. Belmont has like 500 or 300 students. We don't want to locally norm against necessarily a pool that small, but when we group them with other like ones, and I just picked those two because I happen to know the size of those schools. Um, we want to give a slightly larger pool than that. So we were looking really, like Hannah said, about circumstance as opposed to just location or just the county, to try and level that playing field as much as we can.
Can you go, the next slide is also about local norming, so can you skip that one and then just go to the next one? Okay. This was a playlist that hopefully you got a chance to look at. If you didn't get a chance to look at, this is about the role of gifted education and equity. I'm not going to go over that right now though, because we got 25 minutes. Can you go to the next slide? So this next part is about the difference between a special population and an underrepresented population. And I'm going to go more into depth in a moment. But a special population is a small segment of children. So that could include highly and profoundly gifted kids. That could include children in the LGBTQ plus community. Those children are not necessarily underrepresented in gifted education programs. In fact, those two groups are overrepresented. An Underrepresented population can be a special population, but they are groups that are not represented in gifted education due to systemic factors. So it could be poverty, it could be race. Sarah, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so special populations include children from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. So this could be our EML learners, our LGBTQ plus learners, highly and profoundly gifted. All of our 2E kids are a special population that are underrepresented in gifted programs. Low SES, so kids living in poverty and kids in urban or rural settings where they might not have access to education that a kid might in a suburban district like MCPS. Can you go to the next slide, Sarah? Thank you. And then underrepresented populations are the ones that face the burdens of systemic impacts. These are kids that are often under-identified for gifted education, but they could have been. So our ethnically and linguistically diverse backgrounds, our 3E students, our EMLs, kids living in poverty, kids living in rural areas where there just aren't a lot of opportunities. All of those fall into our underrepresented populations. Sarah, can you advance this slide? Thank you. Okay, so now we are going to take a look at the laws. Most states require identification, and many require services for gifted children, but there's not a lot of funding. Maryland is one of the states that does require identification and services for gifted children, but there's no money for it. And there's very little training for it as well. I know that many of us have not received a lot of training about gifted children because the focus tends to be on kids who need support. And, you know, there's definitely a place for that, and we need that. We need to help the kids who are below grade level, but these kids need help too. They need support as well. Sarah, can you go to the next slide? Okay. The other important thing to know is that in Title I schools, only about half of the percentage of I'm sorry, I said that weird. Only about half the students. Let me try that one more time, sorry. Title I schools identify gifted children at half the rate of non-Title I schools. So I said it wrong again. Sorry guys, math is not my thing. All right, non-Title I schools, percentage that identified students as gifted, 55.65%. Title I schools that identified students as gifted, 61.35%. But if you look at the students who were identified as gifted, only about half of the number here are identified here. So if a Title I school has 1,000 kids and a non-Title I school has 1,000 kids, and this school here, this wealthier school identifies 50 as gifted, the Title I school is only identifying 25 as gifted. So students in Title I schools are less likely than their peers in non-Title I schools to be identified as gifted. That was a real struggle for me to get through that slide. Apologies, I hope that all made sense. Sarah, can you go to the next one? Okay, now Maryland, you'll notice we get this D and that's in green, but here we get an F for the equity of access between Title I and non-Title I schools. Maryland is one of the richest states in the country, but we have a lot of disparity between counties, between schools, and we rank 27th, so not in the bottom, but in the bottom half of equity between non-Title I and Title I schools. If we look at the access by race, it looks okay here. We have 1.15 for Latinx students, and that's actually a bit of an overrepresentation, but we're not identifying students who are living in poverty. Sarah, can you go to the next slide?
I will add a little bit of a caveat on this one. It doesn't indemnify us, but in Maryland, the reason for that tends to actually be our rural school districts, not our suburban school districts. So overall, Baltimore City and PG County actually do the absolute best job in the county of identifying students at Title I schools and students in poverty. They are significantly above the national norm. They are above where we are as well. It's actually our smaller districts, and that's part of the reason that the it's part of the reason for the disparity with the Latino population piece is because it's not actually our Latino students in poverty who are under-identified as much, because in the districts where they're struggling with that the most, they are actually majority white districts, and the majority of the students in the Title I schools in those districts are white. So it's a really interesting piece. And I did some work this year because I am on the board for the state for gifted ed stuff. And part of our job is to review gifted policies for other counties. And so one of the counties I reviewed this year is one of these particular counties where they only have 4,000 kids in their whole district. And like they have as many kids in like we were looking at twice as many second graders as they have in their entire district, but their district is more than 50% farms. So Maryland is a very weird state in that sense. And so sometimes these numbers don't make a lot of sense. It's because of the disparity and the differences and discrepancies within our own state. Um, but that doesn't indemnify Montgomery County from some of the issues that we definitely do have.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay. Triple identity theory is probably, I think, the most interesting part of the equity piece here. So there are 3 identities that we are going to talk about in terms of triple identity. There is 3E, there is 2E, like we've been talking about, and then there is twice exceptional, twice with a Y. So 3E means that a child is disabled, gifted, and they have an identity as one of those underrepresented or minoritized groups that we discussed earlier. So they might be an emerging multilingual student. They might be a student from a systemically oppressed group. That has as much of an impact on their life as the disability does. So this quote here, many of you commented on it, was that racism and ethnic bias towards gifted Black boys can exact a similar impact as autism and ADHD experienced among their white male counterparts. So the impact of the disability and the impact of the marginalized identity coexist with the giftedness, and that can create an effect on the child that is similar to what their peers might experience with the disability that they don't necessarily have. Twice exceptionality you see here with the Y refers to a child who is gifted and is part of a minoritized group. This child does not necessarily have a disability, but because they are part of a minoritized group, they might experience the same discrimination or the same hurdles that a child with a disability does. So that's what this quote up here is saying, that this Black child without a disability might experience the same educational impact as a white child with a disability. I know that was a lot of information. I think I have a visual on the next slide that might help. So I'm going to give a moment to ingest that. And then if anyone has any questions, please unmute or drop them in the chat, or any comments.
Hi, I have a question. This is actually about the process of identifying EML students. So I'm an ELD teacher, and as far as I know, there isn't any set process for doing that in MCPS, but I've observed certain things, and I've been teaching ELD for 14 years now. At different grade levels, elementary, middle, and I'm going into high school. And one of the things that I notice is we have the rate at which the student is picking up English. The other thing is, we have students that, the English is like their 3rd or 4th language sometimes. And especially when you get into middle school, I've got kids who are, already bilingual in other languages. And I see, I guess this is kind of anecdotal, but I'll see students who are able to, like, for example, like they can do like simultaneous interpretation, which is, that's a heavy cognitive load. And I notice those kids are picking up English a lot faster. And I feel like because they're not able to necessarily show mastery of English yet, that a lot of teachers and even administrators don't appreciate that a lot of them are gifted. So I was just wondering if you could speak to that, or what is MCPS doing about identifying those students? Because I feel like they're ignored a lot of times, because when you speak to them, they might not necessarily be able to demonstrate in a language that I have a poster in my classroom, and it's of Sofia Vergara from forget that show. Anyway, and she's talking about it, it's like a meme, and it says she's asking, "Do you even know how smart I am in Spanish?" Which which I just think is so funny, because when I hear my students speaking, and I understand quite a bit of Spanish, and I sort of like, well, if they could just demonstrate that in English, I think their other classroom teachers would be really impressed. So I'll stop there if you can respond to that. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're absolutely correct. I went creeping on my school's data earlier today because I was curious how many twice exceptional kids we have. And we have about 40 who are coded as gifted and have an IEP or 504. But then I went to check how many students we have who are coded as gifted and EML. And in a school of 1,300 kids, we had 0. There are a lot of barriers for these students to be identified as gifted. I will also throw out that there are barriers to identifying these students for special education services, because often any struggles they have in the classroom are attributed to them learning the language. There are different benchmarks, slightly different benchmarks on giftedness identification for them. So whereas other kids have to score in the 80th percentile, they have to score in the 70th percentile. But I think we still have a lot more work to be done, because when you're speaking a second language, to score in the 70th percentile on a test of English is still quite a heavy task. And Sarah.
Yeah, so this is a particular, like, as much as I'm the twice exceptional specialist, nationally, I work on our special populations board for NAGC. So special pops in general are like my thing. And I've been fighting this and arguing about this for years. And I'll be honest, I'm arguing with myself in a lot of ways, because it's not that people disagree with us. The problem is, where do we get the data from? And there's a lot of politics involved in it as well. One of the things that we are trying to bring back and do is bring back our cognitive testing. Right now, we don't use any cognitive testing for gifted identification. And while I'm not dismissing anything that Rick said last week about, cognitive tests and IQ scores and that sort of thing, the important part of what we do with some of that cognitive testing is that we look at verbal without English. It is verbal, but not English-based verbal. We look at quantitative, which is non-math based, but still quantitative, and we have other nonverbal measures. We're not using any of those now, and we haven't since before the pandemic, since the year of the pandemic, because of the pandemic, and then because getting things together has been very difficult. There's a lot of pushback because doing cognitive testing takes time, and we're limited in the number of minutes that we have. I would argue that finding out what a child's cognitive potential is a lot more important than whether or not, especially for a kid who English isn't their first language, or they're learning English. I don't care what score they get on the map, but I do care learning what their cognitive potential is, so that we can properly assess and properly educate them. We have a lot of talk about WIDA data, and we're still kind of combing through how to use that WIDA data effectively. To me, and you mentioned this, I think twice, it's not so much the WIDA data as it is the growth. Like, how much, are you still reading on, and I don't get the levels always right, but are you on a level 3? Maybe. But if you started the year on level 2 and you went up 2 levels in a year, that's significant. Like you also said, there's sometimes they're in their third or fourth language. Sometimes they're doing that simultaneous translation. There's so many other cognitive load things. What we struggle with, specifically in Montgomery County, is that we want to use measures that can be globally applied. And sometimes we don't even like doing ones that are not globally applicable to everybody. So like MAP is something that basically everybody does. And our students who don't take MAP because they're EML 1, they are just not screened in that first year, which is understandable when we're talking about MAP. But if we were using cognitive tests, look at verbal as opposed to reading, English reading, we could screen those students. So we're really in a unnecessary conundrum is what I'm going to call it. And it's not, I'm not telling you guys anything I don't say to anybody who asks me and is willing to sit still for 10 minutes and listen to me yammer on. We definitely have talked about pathways. One thing that I'm really pushing for, and I know our team is involved with, is having multiple pathways. Right now, we have the typical pathway. We have the pathway where we can look at either private reports or reports done by MCPS psychologists. We have a pathway for kids who come into MCPS who have been identified as gifted in other districts. What we don't have is any other pathways. And so my goal is to propose 9 different pathways because I really believe if I propose 9, I might get 3. And so I've been really hammering out what that looks like. And the pathway that I'm definitely digging in on is on that EML pathway. I know my supervisor has as well. We also know that in order to make a change for next year, we have to basically have it proposed by January of this year. And so sometimes that cycle just really hits us hard. But I know the people who are actually in charge of GT identification in our office, because it's actually not me, met with the EML team earlier this year for a couple of different things. And one of those was really trying to dig into WIDA data and any other data that we could use to try and make that process more equitable. So much like everything else, I think, you know, a lot of the problem frequently is that we are very data rich and information poor. We have a lot of data and we don't know what to do with it and we don't use it effectively. We have a lot of data that by the time we use it, it's not really timely anymore. And we have a lot of data that snapshots where we are right now, but not necessarily enough of telling us where we could go. And that's really, to me, where we're really failing our students, and especially our EML learners. Right. And I know that is part of the issue with WIDA is that it's a single snapshot and we don't necessarily have multiple points with MAP, you know, because we take it multiple times. We have it, you know, we can compare over the course of a year. We can compare year to year. That helps when it comes to MAP, but it doesn't help if you have a decoding disability. It doesn't help if you are not a strong English speaker. There's got to be other data points, and WIDA is the one I'm the most familiar with, but that also because of those things you're talking about, test length, and it's only an annual piece. Those are some of the limitations. And so the question becomes, what else can we use to better identify these students? I go back to the piece on nonverbal testing and other cognitive testing points. And then we actually are, and Rick alluded to this, we are planning to hopefully be part of a study, a 5-year study with Purdue that looks at that positive psychology piece. So it takes out the cognitive piece, it takes out the language piece, and it builds on some of those other pieces like interest and motivation that we can measure students with. And specifically, we're looking at researching into schools that are both Title I schools or one's a Title I, one's a focus school, that have very heavy EML populations and underrepresented populations in them. That was a really long answer. Sorry.
Did that help?
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate the long answer.
I feel bad because at the end of the day, the long answer doesn't actually answer anything, but it explains at least hopefully where we're at, where we're struggling. And sometimes I really think it helps. These problems aren't falling on deaf ears, but a lot of times just the way the system works, we just don't make the progress that we need to within a year. Maybe we should have an IEP for us too.
Sarah, can you skip ahead to slide 23 because we kind of just covered.
Yep.
It's the one with all the fists.
Sometimes it's good just to know that these frustrations are a little more universal. It's easy to get bogged down and feel the frustrations. Bureaucracy is really, really large, and it's like an aircraft carrier. We can turn. It's just going to take 2 years, you know. So that it was very heartening to hear this discussion. So yes, I know it's a long answer. I just made it longer. Sorry, but it touched me on many different levels. So thank you.
And you can always tell the superintendent he can come visit our office and talk to us directly, because that would also be a nice thing, is if all of our messages didn't get filtered through, because God knows I don't talk to anybody who makes a lot of money, but I feel like if the message didn't get as diluted as it does as it goes up the chain, we'd make a little bit more progress faster.
So 4 key considerations for EML students. I'm just going to go through maybe the next 2 slides before we log off for the night. Are basically what we all just discussed, that a student can be gifted and bilingual. Giftedness is found in every language group. Not speaking English does not mean that a child is less gifted or less intelligent, and that assessment needs to be about identifying giftedness and not English language ability. So that's what Sarah was just talking about with the nonverbal assessment. Even with WIDA data, WIDA is a test of the English language. So while it's good data on what a child has learned to do with English language, it is data on language, and it is data on the English language. So if a child has giftedness in an area other than language, if they're gifted with visual spatial intelligence, perceptual intelligence, that might not come through on the WIDA data. Sarah, can you go to the next slide? One more. Okay. So, and this is the other thing we were talking about, is identification within the schools and examining our practices and policies. This is what we're doing right here. Are they examining, are they cognizant of how the policies affect students from minoritized groups? Are we considering multiple criteria, which is qualitative and quantitative? So the quantitative data, those are the test results. The qualitative are the student, teacher, and parent surveys. If you teach 2nd, 3rd, 5th, or 7th grade, you filled out surveys for your students this past year with multiple questions asking about the characteristics of giftedness. Those are part of the process. Sarah just dropped in the chat a link to the National Association for Gifted Children Symposium on Equity for Black and Brown students, which takes place on my birthday, online. And are the instruments valid, reliable, and culturally and linguistically sensitive? Stop it. Sorry, my cat is trying to walk on my keyboard. So to be valid means that it is measuring what it's set out to measure. To be reliable means to be consistent. It consistently measures what it is supposed to measure. And then, is it culturally and linguistically sensitive? Is it valid and reliable for children from all racial and ethnic groups? Many of our assessments, spoiler alert, are not. So that needs to be something that is continually revised, so that all of our students can be represented and served as is appropriate. Sarah, it is 9 o'clock. Do you want to pick up with the second half on Tuesday? Stop it. That is so bad. I never taught you how to be so bad.
Can you guys hear me? Because it just told me that Zoom quit on me.
You're good.
Oh, good. I get that message frequently, but I don't know. Yeah, I'll talk to our speakers on who we have for Tuesday and just let them know that we need some more time. I'm excited for the folks that we have on Tuesday, because they are really on the cutting edge of what
Oh, I think we lost Sarah.
I think I'm back. Am I
Oh,
back?
you're back.
Yay. So yeah, sorry. So I was saying, our speakers on Tuesday are really on the true like cutting edge of twice exceptional, and they're actually going to talk to us about a new theory that they've developed in the last 3 or 4 years on what twice exceptional is and how we can possibly teach them. But I am going to kind of let them know that we do want to finish our equity pieces. This summer class is just flying by, guys, and if we don't get to stuff in class, then I think what we'll do is Hannah and I will do some recordings and put them up on the Canvas page so that we make sure we get to all this. But yeah, I think that would be a good plan for now, is we'll go ahead and stop the recording for tonight, and we will see you guys back on Tuesday.
We did get through most of the equity, guys, so we don't have that much more to do. We got through all the complicated parts.
Excellent.
Most complicated parts.
Relatively complicated.
Yeah.
In a field of complexity, I think we got through the deepest parts.
Yeah, baby.
I'm also going to post an essay I borrowed from a book for you guys to check out on somebody who exactly like, I forgot who was just speaking. A researcher who experiences that he came from Argentina. He had an IEP, he spoke Spanish, and just his experience. And the quote that I pulled from him recently was that basically that being speaking Spanish was essentially being considered illiterate, and his teachers were shocked as a special education student that when he talked about having read Don Quixote in Spanish and could like quote from it, and his teachers were just utterly shocked and kind of what happened in dealing with that whole type of bias. So I did borrow the essay for something, so I will post a semi-illegal copy of it on Canvas. I didn't record that part, did I? Yeah, I did. Reprinted with less than accurate permission.